Hey everyone, I'm here with Wendy Turner-Larsen, and we are going to talk today about all things psychology, book writing, and creativity. Hey Wendy, how are you?
I am good. It's nice to see you, and thanks for this connection time today.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Why don't you tell people about yourself?
Uh, when I start talking about myself, I realize how old I am because it sounds like I've crammed a lot in. I actually started out in my career as a pastor, so I have a pretty strong spiritual background, and that's really evolved through the years. And then took training to become a psychologist. So I worked I actually am Canadian, but I worked in the US for a couple of years in a psychiatric hospital. So I got a lot of, um, let's say, crisis training, like, jump into the deep end after you've graduated. And then I moved back to Canada and started my own practice as a psychologist. But when I was in graduate school, I also got a master's in adult education. I was actually really interested in leadership and the whole idea of people and how they think and how they behave and how that shows up as a leader, and did a thesis on that. So, which led me to creating workshops. A lot of my workshops and training supports women, women business owners, entrepreneurs, women leaders, because after 30 years of professional work myself, we're recycling through a lot of the same things as women, and I really feel like I really like to help women really get it right this time, which is partly what my book is about. So now I'm a coach, a leadership coach, and still do some individual coaching, personal coaching, life coaching. So I am also trained as a hypnotherapist, so I bring that in. It's interesting, people's path, even though they're interested in leadership coaching, their path is often a spiritual path also, like a soul path. So it's just really fascinating work, just helping people where they're at, helping organizations where they're at, and bringing together what I feel I know can actually help people. So that was a very long answer.
It's okay. That's okay. This is there's no rules here, which is the nice thing. Well, we try not to curse, but
Yeah,
that's
no
about
rule.
it.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's pretty much all things on the table. Um, so I might have overlooked that you started as a pastor. That's pretty cool because in the community, the whole premise is excelling creatively in faith, family, business, and community. I feel like those are the
Mhm.
four areas that we as humans really forget that we can be creative in. In faith, it's
Right.
about co-creating space with God, not just this is my will, therefore you shall do it. And then in family, we forget that it's
Mm.
like my family, my rules. We forget that what works for you may not work for me. And so being able to get real creative with parenting and
Mm.
correction and discipline and all of that stuff. And then community, obviously, we need creativity to get out and address some of the issues we're seeing. And then
Mm.
obviously with business, creative entrepreneurs, creative mindset. And then also I've had a couple chats with some individuals who didn't see themselves as creative, like Kelly from the
Right.
Urban Soul. um urban See, I'm gonna mess it up, I'm so bad with the names. Urban
Urban.
Hair Soul Retreat, right?
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
she's in the same group as us. It was such a great chat, I really enjoyed.
Mm.
But like, she doesn't see herself as a creative. And so we were talking, like, I totally see it as creative to bring all these different faiths together in one space. And
Yeah.
so that's cool too, is to be able to talk about that kind of stuff. So I love that kind of what you've done, that trajectory of your life has been in almost all four of those, well, in all four of those areas. So
Mm.
how did you move from being a pastor into a psychologist into a coach? Like what kind of made those transitions for you?
Um, I mean, there's really a theme in all of it, which is supporting people. And, I really like your broader view of creativity. And so even when I was working as a pastor, there was a lot that was, really about life and life coaching. I just feel like spirituality needs to be really practical. and not, pie in the sky. And there was a lot, that although I wasn't trained as a psychologist at that time, a lot of, interpersonal work with people and helping them, with their families and their kids, and a lot of work, a lot of support with women. So I, at one point in that career, I worked in that for 3 years. I wanted to go to graduate school, and my intention was to then go back into ministry with a master's degree, just broaden my education. So when I was at graduate school, I took a Master of Arts in Adult Education and Christian Education. I had taken some classes where I live, so I finished that master's degree pretty quickly, and I just wasn't ready yet to return to the workforce. I had actually gone through quite a severe and extreme burnout, and was kind of relearning a lot of things around boundaries. What is it that I really want to do? There was a lot of focus on attention to myself, not just, other people. So I just really wasn't ready. So I thought, well, I'll take a counseling psychology master's too, not just for the heck of it. And I thought, well, that's going to put me in good stead, at some point. And because I already had a master's degree, there was core classes that transferred, so it didn't take much longer either. And as I was finishing up that program, I met a fellow in Montana. We started a long distance relationship. So I moved there after graduating. It was important for me to get a job. So I got a job as a counselor, therapist, caseworker in a adolescent psychiatric hospital. So that was pretty challenging. So even there was aspects that, I really think part of the creativity I'm interested in is bringing together all these pieces of a human that show up, even now as I work with leaders. At that time I was working with, with troubled youth. There was soul questions that they were interested in, and I was comfortable having those conversations with them. There was psychiatric issues, of course, and then there was, medical things. So from there, I ended up deciding to move back to Canada, worked at a counseling center, and that's when I really started my own business. And I was a contract counselor. And part of my desire had always been to work in, bringing assistance and help, sort of psychological assistance, behavioral science to the workforce. And so that was over 20 years ago, and there was nothing, emotional intelligence wasn't a term used at that time. And the idea about emotions or stress management was kind of off to the side in organizations. And so I really wanted to bring that to the forefront, but I also knew I've got to have a business plan and get paid for this. So that's, that's been my trajectory, from having a private practice in counseling and at the same time doing some speaking. I'm comfortable with public speaking. And
I couldn't tell.
comfortable speaking, comfortable. So I'm a professional speaker as well. I do keynotes, things like that. So there was no one area that I was interested in. It all came together because it really is about supporting the human. And in organizations, it's really the human side that can be really challenging, and it definitely with what we're facing right now.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that was my trajectory.
I love when somebody has like the confidence and you can see like the individuals who just truly, I could tell that you would command a stage and do really well in that public speaking arena. Part of my background is I was president of my Toastmasters club. I worked with them for several years. Yeah. And it was like, I sometimes, I wish that their schedule worked with mine so that I could go back, because I had so much fun doing it. I always was really bad at the prepared speeches, but really good at the impromptu ones. And the reason I'm so bad at the prepared ones is that I can do a 20-minute speech in 7.3 minutes. Because I tend to I just talk. I found out once I did some test with forget like who did it. We were doing like I think there was like a partnership between a speed reading and then like a speech thing that I had taken back when I was in the corporate world. And they did this test to show how much faster, like how you syllabically, however speak. And my pattern is 100 words per minute faster than the average person. And I'm like,
Wow.
oh, that
It's
makes so much
fascinating.
sense. Now I
Yeah.
understand. So
Mhm.
I'm Toastmasters helped me learn where I would get up there and just be like, oh no, there's still 7 minutes left. To like
Yeah.
be able to take the time and learn dramatic pause. Um, Something
Mhm.
you mentioned that really piqued is the attention to self.
Mhm.
Explore that a little bit, because I think so as a creative, I think that is so important for us.
Yeah.
I'm really big on teaching on that in my own practice, the clients that I work with, especially right now. The other night I sent an email to my audience and my clients to
Mm.
say, like, it's okay to pause. Let's check in. Let's make sure that we're focusing on what matters, because we cannot be good to anybody else if we're not good to ourselves right now.
Mhm.
So when you talk about attention to
Yeah.
self, and especially at that time where it wasn't all this self-care and self-love, and those weren't terms we knew
Right.
back then in the way that they are today, and then especially
Mhm.
coming from that spiritual place where you're almost told to sacrifice yourself at the cost of others.
Right.
how did
That's
that
right.
how was that exploration for you, and how did you implement it?
Um, yeah, that's a good question. You obviously listen well, because attention to self is really my foundational value, and it's what I think trips other people up. That no matter what we do, as a leader or as a creative, and leaders are creative, but whatever we're putting out there, in the world, if it isn't coming from, if there isn't that attention to self, what we put out there is going to be off, or it's going to be weird, or what we put out there or what we do as a career or service is going to be as a way to give attention to ourselves and take care of ourselves. And that attention to self, I also talk about, connecting within to what I just refer to, because it's broader, the divine within. So it's a few things. It's really taking care of yourself, your emotional state, your physical state, your psychological state. And as you do that, you're much more aware. We're much more aware of noticing when, we need to pause, what's going on. And with a lot of my clients right now, I'm encouraging them to really ask themselves more regularly, how am I doing and what do I need? Instead of what do I need to do for others? And it's not one against the other, but the service for others flows from our attention to ourselves. And it's that self-care, that self-compassion, all those terms that weren't, available to us years ago. But what was available to me when I needed to learn this was the term boundaries.
Ah,
And that was life-saving for me, because in the ministry that I was in, and being a person that is people-focused, I just overgave and burned myself out. And where I was living, there weren't even really counseling services set up. We just
oh
called it
wow.
burnout. I was actually depressed. I was actually very anxious, and we just called it burnout. So I took a month off, but it really was, and then finished up my job there. And then I took a year off before I went to graduate school. And that was the exploration of boundaries, that it's not selfish, it's essential. Our first responsibility is ourselves. And that was an absolute turning point for me, in my life. And then when I came to creating my business and workshops, I pulled that in, the whole idea of boundaries, as a piece of it, because it was new to people. I've learned that if I bring something new in, that's the whole piece, they don't know where to attach it to. So, I would talk about boundaries, for leaders. And I mean, it just has this, broad impact. But the journey was, very personal very personal one. I don't know where I'd be if I hadn't come across that information that gave me permission to take a break, to stop. And then from there, really evaluate why I was overdoing and overgiving.
Mm,
Ministry sets you up to do that, but it was really my responsibility. And so, from there, I started to, in terms of my workshops, look at limiting beliefs like people pleasing and perfectionism, which are really just coping skills to try to make us feel safe. Right. And even the word emotional safety and psychological safety it's okay to talk about that in the workplace now. It's certainly the
right.
workplace is the last frontier for all these, what I would refer to as healing pieces. So,
And it's so needed and so important. Oh man, you just said like some things. Oh gosh. I could tell you're somebody like I could be like, oh my gosh, all day. So one of the things you mentioned was the burnout. And I actually took a class back in 2016 at Yale. The Yale Youth Ministry Initiative does these free summer courses every year. And you can get a certificate and stuff. And our church was nice enough. I was working in youth ministry at the time, and they were nice enough to support us in going to this it's a week-long course that you do every evening. And one of these sessions was on ministry burnout and how it's a very real thing, especially in the urban market. I worked at an inner city church, and you're dealing with different needs. And then you have the
yeah,
ministry where um, you're taught pour out, oh, be like a cup, pour out, and then you sit and you let the Holy Spirit fill you back up and then pour out. And I remember
yeah,
I was at a retreat last year in May, and Bethany Perry, she's my coach that I work with. Absolutely love and adore working with her. I've worked with her for years through like a course here, a course there, followed her training, followed her career. She actually used to be my fitness instructor when she owned a gym, and now she's turned from a physiologist into a philosopher and into this great master coach. And she was sharing with us at the retreat how just what an awful idea that is.
yeah,
And so I was talking with a friend of mine last week, and it's interesting how, you learn something, and she shared it like a fountain. It should be more that you're being filled up and giving from your overflow. And I've loved that analogy.
yeah,
But I was talking with a client last week, and I just gave such a simple reference, and it's one that I was like, that's it. That's the way we should be looking at it. And what it was is I had a can of Bang, my energy go-to drink there. And I was drinking it, and I said, imagine if you came into my house and you asked me for a drink. And what I did was gave you what I was already drinking from.
yeah,
You
that's
don't
right.
want that, right? Why would
Yeah,
I do that? Wouldn't you rather have from my overflow of
yeah,
let me go into the refrigerator
mm,
and get you a new one? And I thought, what a simple, like, making it up as I go kind of example. But it was so good because it really, like, in the last few weeks just came alive of this is the problem is we're all, even the fountain, you have like you got to get filled, the top still has to be filled to
yeah,
overflow and it can stop and
mhm,
all this other stuff. But I'm like, man, when I think of like that can, it's true, I would never ask somebody to give me their cup that they're drinking out of or their can
right.
that they're drinking out of, yet we ask people that all the time. We say, I know you're really busy, but, and that,
Mhm.
but, that from that psychology point of view, it's kind of like, well, I know whatever you're about to say, I don't mean to be rude, but okay, go ahead and come at me with the rudeness
Yeah,
then,
yeah,
you know?
that's right.
So that was one thing that really struck out to
Mm,
me was that the ministry burnout, I definitely felt it myself. And I've been on still taking a nice hiatus from that. In the sense of how one of my clients and I talk about this, in the sense that you're taught what ministry looks like, because when we get down to it, what I do daily is ministry. How we live our lives is ministry, whatever faith you call yourself. um,
mhm,
we all are ministering daily in our being.
right.
But I'm taking a time off from the actual act of being in a leadership position. The
Yeah,
other thing you talked about, and I do want to like stay on this for a little bit, but I want to make sure we get to these other topics of your Saturday sessions and the Becoming You as well. But boundaries and just how important the creatives, we can tend to look very bipolar, right? We get that creative
Yeah.
edge that hits, and it's like very similar to mania, but it's not a diagnosable
Mhm.
thing. We're in there.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes when we press into that, we start to feel guilty because we're like, oh, well, I haven't spent time with friends, or I haven't. And something I've learned to do is I know my path. Like, so for me, I can go about 6 months of not seeing another human and be okay with it if I'm on a creative bent, because I'm getting stuff done. I'm in my flow,
Mhm.
I'm working in my genius zone. And then I'll kind of wake up one day and be like, okay, that project's done. Oh, I haven't seen people in a little while. I should really connect with somebody. And then I'll have like 3 or 4 months where I almost over connect compared to my usual self. And
Right.
I learned that for me, that is the boundary, is being able to say, you know what, I'm on a creative thing right now, and my space needs to be given to that creativity. My energy, my time, my resources need to go here. So yeah, it would be nice to hang out with you and go have fun
Yeah.
and talk about your problems, but it's not my priority right now. And as harsh as that sounds, that's what it came down to, is learning I'd spent so much of my life giving to everybody else. And it took me 22 years to publish a poetry, because,
Yeah.
and that
Right.
thing's been written.
Yeah.
Almost every poem in that book had been written already. It was,
Yes.
but it was because I was doing for everyone else. And then it would be like, oh, okay, I have a few minutes here to work on this, few minutes. The whole thing, start to finish, was like 3 days once I sat
Yeah.
down and did it. So when you talked about checking in, how am I doing? What do I need? Um, Give us a couple more pointers, because I feel like there's a lot of people watching this that would
Yeah.
be in that space of um, needing to know, like, how do you give yourself I guess that's what I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How do you give yourself permission to instill proper boundaries?
So, your story, my story is that it's a process, right? We both you woke up one day and said, oh, I've been giving, to everybody else for 20 some years. I've got this poetry book. I woke up one day and was ill. I
Mm.
mean, it all happened, gradually. I was tired and I was burned out. I was severely depressed and, anxious. I couldn't work. I couldn't sleep. So it's definitely, a journey. One of the, boundaries is just so expansive, but it's as important as breathing, drinking water, eating when you're hungry. We avoid rest like it's lazy. We don't deprive ourselves if we're thirsty. Um, and it's an internal, you talked about priorities. It's an internal choice, and you get to decide what your priorities are. So, one of mine is, after I've worked a day with people, I do nothing in the evening other than relax and maybe go for a walk. I don't talk on the phone, with people. But, the key is, that inner connection. And it's really about how you're feeling. So we're so unaware and we're so shut down in terms of how we feel. We're like, oh, how do I feel? I'm okay. And if we were to really go into what that feeling is, oh, I'm kind of angry, and I'm angry at so and so, instead of feeling guilty about that, thinking about, I'm angry and maybe I need a conversation. But it starts with that learning to access what you feel. And so when you're in a creative state, your creativity, your 6 months and then your 6 months different is very different than mine. I go in and, oh, I can't, like, in terms of writing the book, I think there was one day where I wrote 8 hours. Most days was 2 to 3. And, so all of those things, my boundaries around that was, oh, I can't be like other writers and write 8 hours a day and blah, blah, blah. Oh, okay. What do I need to do to complete this project? But and you will feel guilty. I refer to it as false guilt. There's real guilt. which is when you cross a line like murder somebody, lie, or steal, you should feel guilty, right? But your time is your time. And even if people ask you, can you help me with something? And you feel guilty, that's your guilt. So it is some adult work, facing what we feel and owning then our choices. And I've said yes to things I really didn't want to say yes to. And then when I'd reflect on it, I would think about, okay, why? What was going on that I did that? And how can I move into more what I refer to now as self-compassion towards myself, instead of saying, oh, that's stupid, asking myself, what was that about? And what was I really needing? And how can I do that differently next time?
It's really good.
I like that you focused on that. It's in my book, but
Okay.
really my book has all these different chapters, but really the whole thing is about yourself and connection to yourself, and making yourself your first priority, which goes against culture for women, goes against a lot of interpretation of religions. It goes against what's a good leader. You should give, you should work overtime, etc. And it's still exhausting us. So I'm excited when I hear about your story and how you woke up and you're like, that's it, I'm going to do this book. And got it straight.
Yeah. And it's funny, I did a live earlier, not a live, but I recorded a video earlier because a friend and I were talking about like how my family does the whole work from home thing, and how just people are struggling right now.
Yeah.
We're trying to live by what others think is good and what works for them. And it's a new space
Yes.
for all of us. Even though I've worked from home for over a decade, I haven't had a little human sitting in the other room needing attention. And so, these
Yes.
first couple days, it's like I get lost in my work, like lost to the point that like I'll be like, oh man, I haven't peed or eaten all day. Like it would just be like this realization all of a sudden. If there's not a call or something to transition
Yes.
me, my body almost like forgets that it's functioning, because my mind is just on what I'm doing and I'm loving it.
Yeah.
And I love what I do. And the fallback to that sometimes, like the negative side to loving what you do, is you can get just so absorbed in it. And I don't hate it. I don't hate it at all. I
Yeah.
enjoy what I do. But I have to remember like, oh shoot, did she do her schoolwork? Okay, the
Yeah.
teacher, did they text? That's a new space. And so in the live, what I shared is I have been working for years on a book with a working title of Becoming You. That's
Really?
how, yeah, I don't know if I had shared that with you. That's what made me grab on when I saw your
Ah.
thing about Becoming You. And so I was like, well, I can't wait for you guys to hear about this book, because you now get that title, obviously. Because I'm big on, I know that like just for anybody watching this, titles are not copywritten. However,
Yes, that's
you are
right.
not smart to use somebody else's title. So if you
Yeah.
see a book that has a title that you've been working on, find a new one. So that actually is how one of the reasons I stalled in my own book is, for years, the poetry book that I had just published, it was called Yesterday's Tomorrows since 1998, when I first started, with 97, when I first started putting it together. It was always going to be Yesterday's Tomorrows. I love that idea of yesterday's tomorrows and living in this space of today, yada, yada. Well, when I went to do the title search last year, I saw that somebody had the title with the apostrophe. And I'm like, well, that means I would have to do like yesterday's / tomorrow. Nobody's going to remember that. Like if you remember yesterday's tomorrows, you're going to do it with the apostrophe or without it, which is grammatically incorrect, which how dare I do that, having been a developmental editor for years. And so I ended up like stalling for a good 6 months of it. It was written and just sitting, because I was like, I don't have a title, I don't have a title. And so I ended up sharing the story of how I did finally get the title of When I Stopped Remembering Tomorrow, and went from there. And so in this process of the writing is when I came across yours, and in that group that we're in together, I saw you say Becoming You, and I was like, oh. And so like I actually have a whole bunch of hashtags Becoming You on Instagram, because I've been working on this for a while. Totally different concept, totally different thing, but I love the idea. I love stepping into ourselves. One of the big things growing up in the state system, having been through a lot of what I've been through, I learned to be a chameleon and blend where I needed to blend so that I didn't get hurt more than I needed to get hurt,
Yeah.
or was willing to accept getting hurt. Um, and so once I'm 10 years out of my divorce, and about 5 years ago, I started stepping into like, what is it that I really like to do? What is it? And then over the last 3 years, really getting to this place of like, who am I? And so for 10 years, I've been working on this concept of becoming you. And I hear
Yeah.
yours and you talk about it. So tell us, because it gets me excited when there's similarities, even though there's differences. And the truth
Yeah.
is, my book may never come out. It may just end up becoming a workshop now.
Yeah.
Because like once I hear somebody has another idea, I'm like, oh, okay, somebody's in. I love like Darren Hardy is another mentor of mine. I take a class with him, and he's like, I'll own the success space. You deal with the virus. I'll own the success space. You deal with mental health. Like, his whole thing's, we're not
Right.
high-fiving or hugging. There'll be no woo here. And I'm like, but I love the woo. And so I love that space is like, once I hear somebody's doing something similar, I'm like, okay, you own that, unless there's a need for my voice to be heard in this arena.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
share with us what becoming you is, because I only know a little bit about it. You just
Yeah.
talked a little bit. So ladies and gentlemen, when she just talked about the book that she has coming out, it's called Becoming You. There's a subtitle to it, right? Also?
That I haven't figured out yet. It's
Oh,
actually
okay.
becoming you, yes, in quotes, for women. So
Okay.
it
So
is for
gentlemen, not you, but that's okay. You can have your wives read it, or girlfriends.
that's right. There's it's certainly the same concepts will relate to men. So the title's interesting. The title emerged as I was well into writing and re-editing and reworking the book. It started out as I was just going to write a workbook, and then I had a lot more to say than I realized. So it is a combination of theory, information, story, my story, other people's story, and workbook. And my first title was The Courageous Way for Women. And I think it was, later in the summer, this idea of becoming you, because it's a process, but
Mm-hmm.
part of becoming who you really are, that you that's always been there, is the unbecoming phase too. The unraveling of what is not us. You talked about that um, you were pleasing other people, you were focused on other people, and there's a way to step out of that. So what I think's been missing is a clearer pathway of how we can walk into and let go of what is not us, so we really can become our true selves as women. I think, so I take lots of different concepts and put them together and interweave them in this book. So it might be like 30 self-help books or 30 personal development books in one. Because it's that integration that I think is where the power really is, where where I like to say kind of where the magic is. And I think the missing piece is a lot of us will read books, and I learned this when I was a counselor. Oh, here's a good book, and then journal about it. People don't know how to interact with the material. They don't know what to ask themselves. So that was my original idea about a workbook. So you don't actually write in this book, but there's all the questions, there's exercises, there's little assessments, there's pauses where what I've just written, there's some questions. Sit with this, ask yourself how this lands with you. Where do you show up, this way? So the idea isn't that you rush through reading it, but that it's a book, it's a deep dive
Okay.
into yourself. And a look at limiting beliefs, the foundation of self-compassion, the whole idea about emotions and what to do with them for ourselves, and actually the richness of exploring. People don't have a process. If we actually work through a difficult emotion, no one has ever been able to tell me how they did that. And so
Okay.
I do I've created like step-by-step processes. So it's linear and it's not. You know, it's this combination of sort of step by step, but this is really the soul part. You're taking information and you're integrating it into yourself. Some of this will apply to some people, and not all of it will. Pieces will. And to me, that's what I'm really trying to present in this book, the integration of material like positive psychology. How to really bring that in. Like, what do I do practically? What don't I do practically?
Mm.
You know, lots of science. I also am a brain nutritionist. So that was a real healing piece for me, learning about amino acids for depression and anxiety. So I actually took the training. The training didn't exist. I talked to the author of this book that I read. So I've got that training. So I bring a bit of that into the book too. I also bring that into my work. So when you talked about what's emerged for you and how you might put that into a workshop, this is an expanded version of some of the workshops that I've offered for a number of years. Boundaries, direct communication, you know, stress management. Like it's all of that. And the book is, you know, the book will be a good size, but it's not like this big encyclopedia. It's why it's taken me a while, because I need to say enough, but not too much. I want to
Yeah,
take
that's a fine line for so many authors. Yeah. Yeah.
and wordiness for me, but I really want to take the gold from the self-compassion concept, the limiting beliefs, boundaries, emotions, and the thread, and tie it through, you know, as a thread that it's about you and taking care of yourself. And the other piece that I think is really hard, in order to, you know, make major change in our lives, or, you know, shift, create change, it's really hard to do it on our own. So I've set it up so women can do it in groups. You can do it
Oh,
with
nice.
one friend. You can do it with your coach. You can do it with your counselor. Coaches and counselors can do this, because I think that's the piece that's missing. When I started to do groups after my workshops, people would say, I tried boundaries, they didn't work. Well, let's explore what you did try. Well, it sounds like actually part of it did work. What didn't work? What could you do different? So there's this ability, there's this follow up. And, you know, you might work through the book in a year, just do a chapter a month. I have wonderful book coaches, and they've said, do you need everything in here? I'm like, yes,
You
I put
do. You
it all
do.
on the table. There's not one concept that I can leave out, because they all work together, you know, like a mosaic.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's so important. You know, it's interesting. And every book coach has their own philosophy. Every writing coach has their own philosophy. Um, my thing is that there's a specific way we're all supposed to be heard.
yeah,
I believe so fully that we were all created for a very specific purpose. It is up to us to choose whether to walk in that purpose. Um, Again, I come from a
right.
Christian view. I don't believe that God is not a gentleman who would say, like, you have this choice. Like, I could totally be created to be the world's best singer, and I can spend my life destroying my vocal cords and never sing a day in my life. Or I could be created to become a singer, and I should so not have used the singer, because voice discovery, everybody thinks it's, I don't do
Yeah.
singing coaching, but you know, or you could become that singer who steps into it from that moment and just does everything to become
Mhm.
the next Whitney Houston or Alicia Keys, Beyonce, whoever. But one of the things I believe so fully, and I share this on my website, is I use Lisa Turkhurst and TD Jakes as an example. So we all have a voice that we were created with. And when we use that voice in the way that we are supposed to, our tribe, if you will, they're
Mhm.
attracted to us. So
Yeah.
Lisa and TD, and I'm going to say that like that's my boy and my girl, they both wrote in the same year the same book. I know that I'm probably not supposed to say that, but it is the same book. If you strip them down, they probably have the exact same skeleton.
Yeah.
The difference is TD in Crushing tells his story in his way. If you're a TD Jakes fan, you will love the book. There are moments I laughed, I cried, I felt all types of way. One of the eulogies I did, I based on a chapter in that book, because it was just so moving. Now Lisa has her way of doing things, and you strip hers down, it's the same story told from this view by how
Yes.
Lisa TerKeurst tells her stories.
Mhm.
Both went to Amazon and New York Times bestsellers. Both stayed there in #1 for several weeks while at the same time. And why is
Yes.
that? Why? They don't have to worry
Mhm.
about if it was already written or not, because they each have their audience. Now, I'm one who can
Yeah.
enjoy both, but I'll tell you, I go to TD any day because I love his style. Lisa, it takes me a little bit longer to get through her stuff because the angle she comes at is a little different. You know, she's very into that, the feminine energy, and you know, little girls played with dolls and wanted to grow up to be princesses. I didn't. I really didn't. I
Yeah.
don't believe in
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But she has some good content. So if I'm in a good space and I can absorb stuff that I don't always, you know,
Mm.
sometimes we just want to hear what we agree with. And then other times we want to read a book that's going to challenge us. I have
Yes.
to be in the mood where I want to be challenged a bit to read hers.
Mhm.
TD Jake speaks in that space that I'm very comfortable. But so what you mentioned in this, and I know you don't need this affirmation, but I want to speak it anyway, is that yes, people need all of it. And
Yeah.
that's without having ever seen a lick of your book, just for all, like, this is not a
Mhm.
client. So like,
Yeah.
I'm not
That's
having Wendy on here because we've worked together. So without having seen any of it, I shared this actually on one of these talks, I think recently I shared with a friend. I had a realization a couple years ago that was an information whore. I took information in and I
yeah.
did nothing with it.
Hmm.
I would listen to sermon after sermon. I would read book after, and when you said people can't write in this book, or people don't write in this, I will tear your book up. Like,
Yeah.
if you don't want people writing in it, don't know that I bought one. Because I'm like the girl who, like, it's all highlighted and underlined, and I do sticky notes,
Yeah.
and like,
Me
it's
too.
crazy. I love that. To me, like,
Mhm.
that is my dream, to one day write a book that touches people like that, to where there's like
Yeah.
no more room for sticky notes. But in that, I have not been out. I made a challenge to myself 2 years ago when I realized that I can no longer digest anything that I can't. I no longer can watch anything that I don't digest and act upon. If
Mhm.
I'm just, other than fiction, you know, like, obviously a fiction book is not always
Right.
going to change your life. Like, I don't know how Harry Potter or something like that would, like, effectively change me. I'd probably have to look really deep. And usually when I read fiction, I'm just trying to enjoy a fiction book. But in any nonfiction or any sermon I watch, any training that I watch, I make myself, what are 3 things that I learned? And what is one that I can move forward with? I try to
Yes.
do 3, but I'm learning that the 3 overwhelms me sometimes because of the
Yes.
ADHD. So
Mhm.
what is one thing that I can act on from this? If I can't, if I don't, then I, like, almost like put myself in the corner, and I'm not allowed to watch
Yeah.
anything else until I act on it. And that has made it that I'm being
Mm.
more purposeful with what I watch. So I love that you mentioned that what you've done is pull almost like 30 different kinds of things together in one space that I can take a year with and have
Yeah.
that permission. That's something I mentioned in my book too, is, like, in my book was, it took me 22 years to write this. Don't feel like you have to read it in a night. It's heavy stuff. I wrote
Yeah.
this while a state kid. I wrote this while in an abusive relationship that almost took my life. Like,
Mm.
there's so many trigger warnings around it. Like, don't feel like you have to. I lived it, and it's a lot for me some nights when it all hits
Right.
me. So I can't
Right.
even imagine, like, I really, that's part of the responsibility. I talk about telling your story responsibly,
Yeah.
is like making sure it doesn't overwhelm. And so it was like right from the beginning. And I love that you say that right from the beginning here. Take a year. It doesn't have to be
Mhm.
read. And I don't expect you to get back to me next week or leave the Amazon
Mhm.
review 5 days after you bought it. So that's so important. I just
Right.
rambled there for a bit. The other thing I want to say is, about, I love quotables. I love when somebody says something that I'm like, oh, I can market that. You said that this self-care and self-reflection is as important as breathing, and this becoming process. And I love that
Mhm.
because we don't think of it that way. So what
Mhm.
a great way. I hope that's in the book, because that would be so
Mhm.
tweeted so many times.
Mhm.
That is so important, because it's like that oxygen mask thing, right? Like, if
Yeah.
we're not protecting ourselves, how can we be of use to anybody else?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I love that too. your idea of, what emerges, what's important for you when listen to a podcast or take training, and then what you're going to do. Yeah, I think that there's been so many self-help books. People have this expectation, they read it and it will change their lives. And, I'll often say, you didn't learn to ride a bike by watching a video.
Right.
You got on the bike and did it. This is mindset change. You're changing beliefs. That will change behaviors. You're managing your own personal growth while you've got real life going on. A daughter in another room who's now home, with you. So really, it is about giving yourself, the space and time to do, pieces of this in the midst of your real life. But your real life really helps. When people start to show up to do this work, their life takes shape in a way that helps them do that work.
Yes.
Like, it can be hard, like hard stuff can show up, but without the action, there's no change.
Right.
And that's what else reading a book doesn't change you. It's the information that you take in and you integrate somehow, and then you try and you experiment and then come back to. So that's why the idea of a chapter, maybe, every few weeks or once a month, you read and then you do. And then you come back and look at what's the next piece about. If I was to read a book and someone said do a chapter at a time, I'd be like, no way. I'd skim through the whole thing. Or usually, like, I jump around. Well, what's kind of interesting? And then once I've got that curiosity settled, I like to go through books where I can, on a Sunday, sit down and read a book and journal. So I'm hoping that might be one of the ways this book can be used as
I
a
can see that.
reflection.
Yeah, I could see that. You've said so much that makes me so excited. And I had a thought that occurred to me while you were talking, where I was like, I wonder if soon I'll be quoting like Wendy Turner-Larsen, how I quote Darren Hardy and Bob Berg and Bethany Berry. I love when somebody just has stuff, and I'm one of those people that when I really enjoy what someone says, I become their biggest advocate. I become like a true brand evangelist, because there's just some people who, for each of us, there's just those voices that ring louder, and you don't have to shout to be that voice, because the people that you're speaking to will hear it with a whisper. And we forget that. We forget sometimes as creatives and writers. I don't believe I have competition. I really struggle when I work with like brand strategists or talk with individuals from a marketing perspective, because we don't do for ourselves what we do for everyone else, right? Like I have been I was a digital marketer for years. I just put out my first email the other night for my own business. It's never been something that I've done. And I've been one of those people, like, I hate doing for myself, but then I'll do this stuff for my clients like it's nothing. And one of the things that I thought of is, they'll tell you like, well, who's your ideal client, and you got to talk to them in this way, or you have to do this, this, and that. And it's like, but I don't want to. I know those are the rules. I teach them too. But for me, I don't believe that. I don't believe there's competition. You cannot look out there anywhere and find anybody doing what I do, because I'm special, not because I do it in my own way, not because of any of that stuff, just because there's nobody doing what I do. This is my thing, and it's why I'm able to turn people down. It's why I have a 90% rejection rate and a 10% acceptance rate, because I don't just take everybody who has a consultation call. I think that knowing our voice, knowing who we are. So something you said too, and I want to, maybe this will segue into the Sense and Soul Saturday. One of the things you talked about is becoming, and there's a lot of talk about being. But until you become, you cannot be. Anything that was created, whether it's the words we just spoke, whether it's the thought we just had, whether it's the dinner like, everything had to become before it could be. And there's been a lot of
Right.
focus of being present, being in the moment, et cetera. And I love all that. I mean, wrote a
Yeah.
book about it, right? Um, love that concept. It took me a lot of years, 43 years to come to understand that. But I think the becoming aspect is so important, because once you become, that next step after you've applied what I imagine you're teaching, and I so can't wait to get my hands on this, but you said fall, right?
Yes.
About fall time. Okay.
Yeah.
So everyone look for this book in the fall if this is your thing. Um, is there plans in the future, do you think, and this is putting you on the spot, of like teaching how to be after you become? Or is your work focused on the becoming? Like, do you work at all with the being moment?
That's that's a really good question. And your understanding of becoming and then being, yeah, I would, and I will reflect on that more. But I think right now, as I understand how we become, it's in the being us that we become us.
Okay.
And in the
So like
being,
they're interchangeable and kind of like parallel, or?
not interchangeable, but in part, the being, in terms of the being and that being present, there's a lot of that, it can really invite deeper, self-acceptance. And that's essential into becoming who we really are. Otherwise, we'll be striving to be something that we're not, which we see a lot.
Okay.
So yeah, as I understand it, the being us and being in the moment is part of that, or the just being. I think that that's sort of foundational to then we will more naturally just evolve into who we are.
Okay.
So I hadn't thought of that before. That would be my take on it.
Okay.
And the Sense and Soul Saturday is who knows when people will be watching this, but we're in 2020, and so I'm having 15 to 20 minute a live Facebook on my business page, Turner-Larsen Consulting. And you said something really interesting, that none of us are like anybody else. There can be millions of marketers, there can be millions of psychologists and coaches, even hypnotherapists. What's important is we bring our soul to that, and that's our unique gift to the world. And I like what you said, be who I am, and whoever resonates with that connects. So yeah, Sense and Soul Saturday would be at noon your time, EST, 10 Central Standard Time right now. And it's just a 15-minute conversations like this. I call it coffee and a conversation. People can post their questions. There's, because a lot of the concepts are in my book, there will be some excerpts about that. This Saturday, okay, I'm going to talk about self-compassion in turbulent times, and how really dig into one aspect of it. And so just how settling and calming self-compassion can be. So last Saturday was my first one, and I talked about finding your calm. So,
Okay.
yeah.
I have my little human is trying to talk to me through the window, and so I'm trying to shoo her away because I'm recording, but I don't think I did a very good job if it does show me while it's recording you. So
I have a big human. I have a big human that shows up from time to time who will.
You get the little like through the window. I'm getting
not here. Yeah.
I'm sure she's asking me, can I play Minecraft more? But
yeah.
it's like, go away right now.
Yes, you can.
So, but so with the Sense and Soul Saturday, anybody can show up. That's
yes.
And it's Turner-Larsen Consulting, or is it Turner Space Larsen? Just because I don't have it up in front of me right now.
Yeah, Turner Space Larsen, and Larsen is SEN.
Okay.
Consulting, yes.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I share those in the video
Thank
as
you.
well. Like in the
Thank you.
description, I always share them at the bottom of the YouTube video. I also put them on the blog in the context as well. Tell us where else we can find you, Wendy.
Turner-Larsen.com is my website. Again, Larsen is EN. And all my contact information is there if people want to reach out by email or phone. Have any questions, I'm really open to that. And all my social media links are on my website.
Oh, that's awesome. That it's funny how simple that is and how so many people forget it. I deal with that with the nonprofit I work with.
Right.
Is like I'll go to a website and in my mind, this is where I should be able to find all the other links. And then I'm like, why am I still spending hours trying to find people on LinkedIn and Facebook? And so, because I always want to know from a
Right.
company perspective how to find people. So that's really interesting. Free marketing tip there is share your business LinkedIn, not your personal LinkedIn, unless you want people connecting with you to know your resume versus what you're putting out there for a business.
Yeah.
That's a free tip for this, totally unrelated to this
Tip.
content. I've been amazed how many small business owners will do that lately. I never realized that was a thing. So we've covered a lot, and we could definitely both, I think, talk for hours. This has been really enlightening. I believe we met in a group that is based on like taking your health practice online?
Yeah,
Or
the heartfelt
heartfelt. Oh,
entrepreneurs.
heartfelt.
Yes.
Okay. Camille's group.
Brandy.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow, Brandy. Okay. That so
Yes.
makes sense. I'm in 3 of them that I really enjoy, and then I have a
Ah,
couple others that I've met some interesting people, but I'm not involved in the group much because
right.
there's not a whole lot of information posted. Oh, I love Brandy's group. I'm a lurker there. I'm a lurker. I don't
Yeah.
participate as much, but
Yeah.
I lurk because,
Yeah.
and then I just found out today she's in another group I'm in, which I did not know. I saw her
Oh,
picture at the top because I went on from the computer. So you actually see the little faces. So, okay, Brandy's, yes. So for any of
yes.
you guys, because I do like to promote where we meet each other. When possible and when I remember. So School for Heartfelt Entrepreneurs is
Yes.
run by Brandy Good, and she is from BLG Business Solutions out of
Mhm.
Canada. She has been an amazing resource. And
Yes.
for all of you watching this in 2020 during this coronavirus issue, she has some wonderful resources on her website, blgbusinesssolutions.com.
Right.
I believe it's .com. On how to take your live events online, what kind of social
Yeah.
media she does. Brandy's really interesting because I had to use a caveat because I wanted to share her in our nonprofit in the one of her resources, and I had to tell my boss, I'm like, she uses like the S word in her marketing, but if that's okay, then I'd really love to share. And my boss laughed. She's like, at this moment, I think people are using a lot
I
worse.
think that's okay. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I was like, from a because we work with like all like professional brick and mortar small businesses, and so I know like in the more solopreneur and business person working from home, that the cursing has become a popular thing, whereas I was like, I'm not sure if it's made it to like the Hitachis of America yet.
Yeah.
And so I'm
Exactly.
sure they all curse at their level, but yes, okay, so that's really good because I couldn't remember where
Yeah.
we had met. And I know
Mhm.
it's been for a little while we've been connected and just trying to reach out and different things
Right.
happening. You are in Canada, which you mentioned there.
Yep.
And so um, you do
Same
your work
city as Brandy.
online now. Oh, okay. Do you know her in person then?
Yes, and that's
Okay.
why my website has all those social media pieces. I hire her to do a lot
Okay.
of that kind of work for me. So
Which I
yes.
did learn that even though Brandy's booked, she is still taking folks because she has a great team with her. So that
Yes.
was really good to learn today.
Yes.
I saw her notice that she's full, and I'm like, that is my prayer for all of us, that we would all be booked. It's
Yeah.
actually on my vision board, like, sorry, I'm booked. And when I put it on there, it meant,
Oh,
when I put that up on my vision board, it meant because the people pleaser in me, like I mentioned, I would get in these creative bents and I would give myself like, oh, well, I have to go help them move because they asked, or oh, I haven't seen them, so I should say yes. Well,
yeah.
when I went into last year, when I made the vision board for the beginning of 2019, I was like, I'm setting this boundary. Like, no, I'm booked. And that's when I started calendar blocking. And so now it's like, if it doesn't say spontaneous time or friend time and you ask me, sorry, I'm booked.
Yes.
And that has made it
That's
easy.
fabulous.
Yeah, when you talk about the lack of guilt that we put on ourselves, that has helped with that, because I can't feel guilty because my calendar tells me where I'm supposed to be, and my calendar says that I am not available. So I don't feel
Right.
guilty because
Right.
something's
Oh,
happening
that's
in my life. Yeah.
fantastic.
That
Yeah.
was
Good
something
way
I
to
learned
do it.
from Bethany as well. So we are the product of the 5 people we hang out with most, as somebody said
Mm-hmm.
that once. And Bethany is somebody I spend a lot of time listening to. And so I really enjoy that. Is one of the best trainings she ever did, was a spring cleaning on your mind. And it was
Yeah.
like calendar blocking and incompletes and learning how
Hmm.
to give yourself permission to say no. And that's such a powerful
Hmm.
word, because we focus on the no, but if we reframe that,
Hmm.
whatever we say no to, we're saying yes to something else.
Right.
And
And it's
Darren Hardy
actually,
actually taught about that last week, is
yeah.
what you say yes to is a no to something else. So say
Yeah.
what you want.
And a weak yes doesn't help anybody. It isn't good for the other person. Like, you go and help them move and you're grumbling, and in your head you're like, I hate you. Why did you ask me? And I wish I was at home. Like, that's going to show up, right?
And it
So,
does. And then you get home. And so when you're a people pleaser, you end up getting home and you beat yourself up over how you didn't smile enough, or you weren't this, or you weren't that.
right.
And so it becomes this negative experience, even if nobody else did notice.
That's right.
It's 2 days afterwards of
Yeah.
just feeling like complete crap. And so in 2019, I spent a lot of time where I didn't see any friends. I finally stopped
Mhm.
being the one to always reach out. And I
Yes.
did this
Yeah.
little test where I was like, if I stop reaching out, that's
I
going to
did
know
that too.
who comes into my space. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to do it from the right mindset. Right.
Yes.
And so not preaching to you, but for people who are talking
No,
about,
I understand.
there's
Yeah.
people who will do this from that negative space of nobody cares about me.
Right.
You
Right.
can't do it from
And
that,
yeah,
because you attract what you put out there. But when you do it from that strong space, it was really good, because I wanted to see, who am I inviting into my space that I have in my space because I feel guilty letting
yeah.
them go, but don't
Hmm.
need to feel guilty for letting them go, because if I don't hang on, they don't notice. There's so many
Right.
people where we're hanging on by a thread and the only person holding the thread is us.
Right. It tells us a lot. Yeah, that over loyalty, that over responsibility. That's a big piece of it.
So
So,
much, so much. That's I'm really excited for your book to come out. I can't wait to
thank
read it.
you.
I would love to talk with you after it comes out, and have you on again and talk about
Would love
some
that.
stuff. We'll do it a couple months after, so I get through at least a chapter. But
Yes, you get.
so, or at least do my first take on it and then come back. I have a feeling this would be the book that I like run through to get all of it and then come back. I did that with Compound Effect from Darren Hardy.
Mhm.
I read through the whole book the first time I read it, and then I came back and I did like exercise by exercise.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
that was still when I was in that just take everything in kind of phase. Well, I went back through it last year, and I actually shared with him and his team is that by taking what he taught along with Rachel Hollis, and I shared this on another one for those of you who have watched all of these, I was telling Cindy about it, but I took last year, the Rachel Hollis does this last 90 days challenge. And I
Mm.
took her
Mhm.
principles in addition with the compound effect, and through them ended up losing 30 pounds, completely morphed how I was showing
Mhm.
up for things. And it was so good, but it was all information I'd already had,
Yeah.
but I hadn't activated. And
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of us, and we'll close on like that kind of note is, I encourage like anybody watching this, whether whatever book you read or help you get, Wendy's got the coaching practice, and there's books that you can read from on the self-help spectrum. But for anything that you do, make sure that you're applying it in some way. You don't have to go as deep, where it's like, how do I
Yeah.
do 3 things? But being able to take that
Mhm.
information in and say, I love the questions you asked. You said you asked them, what did you learn from this? And how did you
Mhm.
apply it? Is that how you said it? Because when you said
Um,
them, I was like, ooh, I wrote down.
yeah, some different questions. But one of the questions I'll ask my coaching clients a lot is, when they're judging, they're not being who they want. instead of asking a why and that's stupid, that they ask, what was I really needing at that time?
Okay.
How am I doing? And what am I really needing? So throughout my book, I have a bunch of different questions. So I'm not sure if that's the one you were referring to, but lots of things for reflection, to
I,
slow down. I have
I think we need that.
poems in there too.
Okay. Now, ones that you wrote or ones that you share from what others wrote?
Both. Yeah, both.
I didn't know that.
Yes, and like, instead of whipping through the poetry, I'll have a poem and then, pause, take some time to reflect. How does this feel? What shows up for you? That kind of thing.
Will you
Yeah.
be sharing the poetry live ever? Have you considered that as part of a marketing campaign with the book?
Part of Sense and Soul will be about sharing, as I move forward, into it. I don't want it to feel salesy. I really want it to feel like I'm really wanting to support people.
Yeah.
I had planned Sense and Soul for a couple months, and then last Saturday was a date that I had picked, and so all this chaos is going on.
Yeah.
So as I move forward with Sense and Soul, that's my platform to share pieces from the book. And actually, this Saturday,
Okay.
I am sharing a poem, not one that I wrote, but
Okay.
one from the book that really just fits with self-compassion.
Very nice.
Mhm.
Something somebody said to me, and just so if you do end up getting into like a real marketing campaign, right now I'm working on a blog post for my show Vera site. I have the bag today about like how people have a lot of sucky books out there that sell really well, bestsellers that suck, and then there's really good books that will never see the bestsellers because they're poor sellers, because so much of the secret is in marketing.
Mhm.
And so if you do decide to market something that was shared with me by your
I
reader.
just did this, so just
Oh,
so the viewers know, there was a bug in front of
oh,
me.
okay. That was her cue of like, show, we've been on for an hour, stop. But so just a free thing. Somebody had told me that with, because mine was a poetry book, and then I did reflection over like introducing it. And then at the end, I went back. And so all the poetry is together, but then there's reflections to share, kind of like an artist does. If you go to an artist showing, they'll sit and tell you what they were thinking when they did the.
Ah, right.
What I do is walk through the gallery with you, and you kind of get this view of
Mm.
life, if you will. And she said to me, have you thought about going live with the poems so that we can hear your inflection, the way you read them, etc.? And I had not, because I hate video. And so I hadn't thought about that. But now I'm like, okay, that
Yeah.
watching this girl, Carly Janae is one of my favorite poets, and she does the Psalms. And when she does them and her spoken words, like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I would have read the Bible years ago if I had had somebody read
Yeah.
David like that, you know?
Right.
So
Right.
just a little like thing for you there, if you hadn't
Mm.
considered it as an actual marketing piece,
Mhm.
outside of that Sense and Soul, is just like a quick clip of like a teaser into one of the poems, or
Right.
even a sectional reading, because a lot of authors don't think about that. And so depending on the marketing team that you have, and I don't do marketing, so this isn't an ad for anybody to like come seek me out. This is just, I do marketing for like an actual profession part-time. And that is the only space I do it, aside from when I work directly with a client. Sometimes I just can't help myself because it's who I am. But so just a free thought there, depending on who you're working with, those are really good to do, because
Mhm.
so many people like the video right now.
Yeah, that's right.
It's what our
They do.
minds comprehend, and especially in this time where everybody's looking for stuff to watch. So I'm so excited. This has been good. We could go on forever.
Thank you, Shell.
I will stop here so
Okay.
so that we can have a part two. But thank you so much for coming on and joining us and being with us today, Wendy. I appreciate it.
Mhm. Thank you. Wonderful questions. And yeah, just really loved the connection with you today.
Thank you so much.